Previously on South Park.
Hey y'all, this is Trey Parker,
This is Matt Stone.
and we're here to do commentary and talk about our own stuff. Because we love talking about our work.
But we don't love it that much, so we only talk about 3 to 4 or 5 minutes per episode
Yeah.
instead of like full 22-minute commentaries like some people do. We try to pack it in and make it a lot better version, but just 4 minutes long.
Because we really, really don't like analyzing what we've done. Especially stuff we've done a year ago, because we don't really remember. But this run, this first half of the season, this is season 10 here is actually 2 runs for us. It's 2 7-episode runs, so this was sort of the spring run. And it was actually a pretty tough run, only because for one reason or another, we were in the news like every week. Because this was, even though we had done the Scientology episode the season before this is when kind of all the hubbub about it actually broke, because
A rerun got
a
pulled.
rerun got pulled and it just became this huge, deal. And so that was in the news all the time, and then Isaac quit, that became in the news, and then the whole thing with Muhammad was in the news, and it was just like every week where like we would do a show and then there'd be a news story about it. And so it would seem like that would be kind of cool, but it's not at all. It's fine when you're not trying to do a show, but when you're trying to do a show and you're having to read about the show you just did last week and everyone's take on it, it's like
And you're
it's
trying to be
actually really
and you're
hard.
trying to be funny. It's
Yeah.
weird. It's hard to be stressed and funny.
But this episode, we had gone and done the writers' retreat, and we had come up with ideas for shows, and we were going to start the season with the Muhammad episode, but that was becoming already a fight with Comedy Central of how we were going to be able to do that. And so then what happened was, about a week before this episode, we got the news of Isaac's press release to the where Isaac had quit, and we understood that, and we actually all left on really good terms, and he was like, I'm a Scientologist and I want you to pull that episode. And we were like, well, no, we're not going to do that because we don't do that. And then he said, his lawyer said he's resigning. And we're like, okay, you know what? We understand. We knew that was a risk when we did it, but we had to do it. And so, it's been great. And see you, love you. And then out of the blue, sort of when all the Scientology stuff broke with them pulling the episode, the rerun, there suddenly was this press release of Isaac saying that we were bigots and that's why he quit. And it was just so ridiculous, and so we still don't even really think it was written by Isaac, but anyway, we're like, all right, well, game on, and we just decided to basically respond to that whole thing and Chef's character and go basically do another dig at Scientology, which we wouldn't have even done except that they basically egged us on. So
And our basic attitude about, and we kind of had, it kind of felt like we had to do it because we had to answer where Chef was, but we didn't have Isaac to do his voice anymore, so we couldn't even do the classic send him off episode. But our basic attitude about the whole thing was in the end of the show, where basically the boys say, we don't blame Chef for all this stuff, we blame this silly little club that scrambled his brains.
no.
And that's basically the way we feel about
basically
Isaac
how
and
we feel,
Scientology. It's a silly little club that scrambles people's brains.
And then, peppered in there was the very childish take of just like, let's just take his dialogue and make him say stuff he'd never want to say. So that's really where the whole idea for the show. But then it made sense. It's like, yeah, we'll do that, and then we'll say who's making him do that. It's this weird group
Yeah.
he belongs to now, and it all.
It's
They all
childish,
kinda
but it
came
makes good
together.
sense of like some bigger presence putting words in your mouth and making you say stuff that
Yeah.
isn't what you said. And,
But it really is kind of like, this season can definitely be, and we learned a lot from this season, and it actually changed the season we just finished, which was the first part of season 11, where we started becoming super self-aware in this season, and it was partly our fault, but it was partly also just because we had no choice. I mean, we were really like top news every single week, whether it was for Scientology or the Muhammad thing, and
or the Bloody Mary episode.
and
too.
because we can do an episode in a week, we were like, okay, well, we can respond to that. Let's respond to that. And we were responding to things in the news the week later in our animated show. And on the one hand, that was super cool, and it made it even more fascinating. But on the other hand, we kind of had to take a step back, especially at the beginning of the season. We're like, all right, let's just be funny again and like not worry about responding to everything that people are saying about us. And so I think it made for some really cool. I think actually this episode's really good, and I think the Muhammad episode's really good. But we were definitely starting to be a little bit too self-aware.
Now we're not aware of ourselves at all.
Yeah, now we try to not be aware of anything. So let's move on to the next episode. So the whole idea for this show came about from, at the writers' retreat, we came up with the idea of like, yeah, cars can be bad because they cause smog, but hybrid cars cause smog, and that's way worse. And, and it really was true because, you know, especially here in LA, it's like, I mean, there really still is, but there was just this time where it was like people that drove hybrid cars just went around, you know, and most people in LA drive hybrid cars and then they go and get private jets to go wherever they need to go and burn more fuel than the average person in an SUV will in a year. But then they drive around in their hybrid going, yeah, I'm doing something for the, and they do talk with their eyes closed.
We were at a dinner with some really high, like one of the, like, we don't go to these dinners very often. It's like one of the only dinners we've gone to where it's like really high level Hollywood people, like high level execs, studio heads and stuff at this dinner. Literally everyone at the table except for us flew in private jets almost exclusively. Like these people hadn't flown commercial in years, and all of them to a person had a hybrid and were congratulating themselves about like having this hybrid. I'm first on the list to get the new Ford hybrid. That's great. Good for you.
And a woman at the dinner actually said, yeah, well, it's important for us to set an example.
Yeah, because then we started bringing up the private jet thing. Well, isn't it weird that you fly a G5 and then you also have a hybrid? Like, what the fuck is that? And they're like, well, it's up to people like us, you know, to set an example for the little people.
And then
they were so fucking smug about it. It was unbelievable. And the other thing that's interesting is that in researching this episode, we found out that part of the reasons why I think it was a Honda hybrid, where the hybrids where they try to make it look like the regular version of the car don't sell as well as like the Prius or something that looks different, in the way that people who have hybrids really want other people to know that it's a hybrid.
Yeah.
So that's why they all have to look different. People don't want, like, well, if I just buy that car, no one's going to know I bought a hybrid and I'm awesome, and so they don't sell as well.
But
which is really interesting.
It also came about because I bought my mom one of those Honda hybrids, and just because, you know, it's my mom. My mom, it doesn't have to pay as much for gas. That makes sense for her. So I bought her a hybrid, and she told me that and it still happened. She said that the first day she was driving around in that car, people were pulling up next to her and giving her a thumbs up and going, "Good for you," in their hybrids. And I was like, "You got to be fucking kidding me." And she's like, "No, that's what they do." And so, you know, it's like, yeah, good for you. You know, her son, I bought her that, and I own 2 SUVs. You know, whatever. That it's just, it doesn't. But then that's why we put that in this show.
It's like the whole idea of like environmental stuff and hybrids or whatever is fair trade coffee and stuff is so much about people feeling good about themselves buying it. It's like, well, now I feel a lot better about buying this thing because this is actually blah blah blah, which I guess is all right. I mean, if it does good, but it's just
fine as long as you're not saying it with your eyes closed.
Yeah, and as long as you're not a fucking dick about it.
Because it really, that's what
the
brought
eyes
us to,
closed thing is
yeah.
When someone says something with their eyes closed and goes, well, you know, I just like to do something good for the earth with their eyes closed, you know something's fucking wrong.
Yeah. And that basically is 90% of San Francisco. I mean, when we were coming up with, you know, smug and the whole idea of what would be the smuggiest city in the country, there was no doubt what it would be San Francisco, because they really believe they know what's best and that everyone else is just kind of retarded. And people right now in San Francisco are sitting there listening to this going, but we do, with their eyes closed, saying, no, we don't think we're better. We just think, we lead the way a little bit. And you're saying it with your eyes closed, and fuck you.
And then, remember, this was right, and then we would work the George Clooney speech in this. George Clooney at the Oscars said something like, well, we're the most progressive people. We're always ahead of the curve anyway. Like, we gave this black actor I think best, I don't actually remember the particular, but he said something. It was very, like, get up in front of Hollywood and say, but we're pretty awesome here in Hollywood. It was the smuggiest thing we'd ever heard in our life. It was so self-congratulatory. He just had a huge hand patting himself on Hollywood on the back. And so we made that into, like, the big thing that's going to create the perfect storm of smug. A perfect smug storm. The other thing that's funny about this episode is when Ike is tripping balls.
That was pretty
He's tripping balls right now.
We just got a little kid to say, I'm totally tripping balls.
And it's so funny the way he says it. It sounds like he's tripping balls.
It sounds like he's tripping balls. All right, let's move on. So this is our big Muhammad episode, big 2-parter, and as we were making the show, the argument was still going on with Comedy Central. You know, we were still saying, well, can we show Muhammad this way? Can we show him that way? Can we show a guy that says, I'm Muhammad, and then we say he's not, you know, and all of this stuff. And even as we made this whole first part, we still were in the argument, and that's why we decided to make it a 2-parter, because we're like, well, they're still not letting us show Muhammad, so let's make it a 2-parter, and we'll argue about it for another week.
Let's see if they'll let us at the end of that. Yeah.
But what's funny is, of course, this has become more notorious, not for Muhammad and that whole thing, but because this is the episode where we rip on Family Guy. And so everyone, that's what most people want to talk to us about, going, do you really not like Family Guy, or are you? And I just want to say for the record right now, like, we've seen Family Guy. We do hate it. We do hate Family Guy. And it's just a person, and we totally understand that people love it, and that's why we put it in the show. We understand that it speaks to some people, and it's like it can just be a simple laugh, and that's great. And we certainly don't think it should be taken off the air or anything like that. We just don't respect it in terms of writing. That's probably the best way to put it.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because, there's basically, we always try to avoid, there's one thing we always try to avoid in South Park is gags. We hate gags. And so whenever we're bringing in new writers, we always know the gaggy writers, right? Which are the ones that no matter what you're talking about and how deep of an issue or whatever character arc or whatever it is, they're just throwing out a gag. And it's just like, yeah, and then he says this. And it's like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That has nothing to do with that character. You're just throwing out a gag randomly. And it seems like Family Guy is basically just gags.
I think what makes me disappointed about Family Guy is I think it could be an amazing show. I think you can tell they're smart people working on it. But I think they've just kind of gone for...
I don't think they work hard enough.
Yeah, they need to work harder. What's funny about this show, too, is that, after we felt very passionate about the Muhammad cartoon issue and controversy, in that it was so strange to watch a new taboo being basically formed, and that taboo being formed by people getting threatened by violence if they were to put Muhammad in their cartoon. And so we did this, we did this whole episode and everything, and then we'd go and we talked on a couple panels over the summer, and everyone wanted to talk about Tom Cruise. It was like so disappointing, you know what I mean? It was like, that is like the Muhammad controversy and the cartoon wars was so interesting, and everyone just wants to say, you guys gonna do something more with Tom Cruise? You gonna make him gay? It's like, God damn it.
Let's go on to the next one. We'll talk more about this.
Previously on South Park.
So this was obviously a homage to ourselves, what we did with the Terrence and Phillip, our first season when we did another two-parter, and we came back and did a Terrence and Phillip episode instead, and people were really pissed off. And so we thought we'd just make people think that for a minute. But we also, we had come up with the whole Terrence and Phillip idea with Muhammad, just because then it was even more, like Muhammad in Terrence and Phillip style is even more ridiculous, because it's just a little guy with a square head going, hey guys, I'm Muhammad. You're just like, well, no, it isn't. And it's like, well, you can't show that. It's like, come on, it's obviously not Muhammad. But we were going to have the guy come up and say, I'm Muhammad. And then say, no, I'm not. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. But maybe I am. And then give that to Comedy Central and see what they,
Right.
Well, I guess you kind of can show them, but I really want to see Mystery at the Lazy J Ranch.
I love that.
Too. Whenever we do a Terrence and Phillip thing, like, I want to see this whole episode.
Yeah. Actually, we should do another Terrence and Phillip soon.
Yeah.
Because we always want to do one, and then we always think, like, people are going to hate it.
We're kind of Terrence and Phillip shy because of what happened, but we still love them.
What else happened in this episode? This is part 2.
Well, what happens, a big thing that happens is that Cartman goes and meets Bart Simpson, and we know a lot of people at The Simpsons, and The Simpsons is a show we respect very, very much. But it was pretty great because after this episode aired, actually, no, it was after the first episode aired, so this was the second part, but after the first part aired, we got calls from people at The Simpsons saying thank you, because they actually hate Family Guy more than we do, even though they won't say it. And then we got calls from people that work on King of the Hill saying, they said, quote, you're doing God's work by ripping on Family Guy. And like, because Family Guy is kind of this, it's like the Justin Timberlake thing. It's like when you're a musician and you're doing your stuff and you're working hard and you're trying to do art, and then Justin Timberlake comes along and just rakes in all the cash and everyone thinks he's awesome. You're like, dude, come on, that's not that good. But that's how sort of everyone in this town feels about Family Guy. And again, it is like this childish jealousy too, because it's like, come on, our stuff's cooler.
Yeah,
but
it totally is childish because Family Guy gets like 4 times the ratings of us.
So Simpsons people are really upset, but they were so happy about this episode that then, after we had talked to them, we're like, okay, well let's have Bart feel the same way that Cartman feels, and we'll just have Cartman meet Bart, and then we'll put in the King of the Hill staff in there too, just for fun. Yeah. And so it was really like there was this very animation solidarity moment where everyone did come together over hatred for Family Guy.
And then the other thing that we actually, after this whole thing, it was in the new, because we put this end on where you finally get to see the animation that Al Qaeda's inflicted upon the world, and it's It's Jesus and George Bush, and shitting on who is it? Who's not shitting on who? I can't remember.
Jesus. Well, it's so badly
It's just a
animated that you can't
shitstorm,
even.
isn't
It's
it?
just, yeah.
And then that was in the news of like South Park has Jesus shit on George Bush or George Bush shit on. It was just like, oh my god. The whole point of that was the whole point was that like it really is, and this is where we kind of agree with like the super Christian like people, is that like it really is open season on Jesus. Like you can do whatever you want with Jesus, but
because you're scared of them blowing you up, you can't make fun of the Muslims.
yeah, you can't make fun of Muhammad. And then that made us incensed. Then people would say, well, Comedy Central has a right to show whatever they want. Matt and Trey are being like childish about this. If Comedy Central is like, while that's true, and we kind of agree that like Comedy Central can put on whatever they want, if that's not really a fair argument if they're getting threatened with murder, because then they really don't have the choice. If they're, you know what I mean? If they're going to like put it on the air, because if you're getting threatened by bombings, which by the way they weren't, they're being wimpy. We kind of think Comedy Central pushed out on this whole thing. We still do, but we got to make a pretty good funny episode out of it.
All right, so let's move on to the next one. So yeah, this episode we can explain maybe a little bit. This was, again, this is what we called a bank show, where we before we start a run, if we have kind of an idea for a show, we'll animate some of it, just so that, most of the other shows we come up with on the fly and we work really hard and get it done like super fast. I mean, not super fast, we grind, but we try to keep it super fresh by doing it that week. But we kind of kill ourselves doing that, so we always try to have one episode kind of in the bank so that we can at least take a day off in the middle of the run. And this was that show, but the idea for the show was we're going to do the show Intervention, but with Towley. And so we had actually animated this whole thing, like 10 minutes worth of show that was just done in the style of Intervention, and the whole town of South Park had come together and convinced Towley that he needed to give up pot and all of this stuff, and we didn't know where it was going to go, but that 8 minutes was kind of funny, and it had the kids in it, and it had townspeople in it talking about Towley's addiction problems. So then we're going through the run, and then it gets time, all right, let's do the bank show. And we suddenly realized, we took a couple days off, which we shouldn't have done, and then came back to this episode and we're like, wow, we have nowhere to go with this. We basically need to scrap it and start over. And it ended up being basically a show that got done in, a matter of days, because we changed everything and we took out all the intervention stuff.
Right.
But the thing we had come up with the writers' retreat that we was all the Oprah stuff, and so we kept doing the Oprah conversation, but with her vagina and her asshole, and we just thought, like, we loved that stuff, and we loved it because it was kind of a throwback to the radio, like old comedy radio and old drama radio, which I love to listen to. And I really liked writing that stuff because it was like, okay, you got to write this stuff, but you're not going to see any of it happen. You're just going to know it's somehow her vagina and her asshole talking. And at the end of it all, I think, like, if we had made an episode that was like The Boys and then Oprah and her talking asshole, it would have been like amazing. Or if we would have done a Towley show that was Intervention in the whole town. But what it ended up being is kind of weirdness on top of weirdness. And so it ended up being a show most people didn't like.
Yeah, it's known in the business as a hat on a hat.
Yeah.
We had a hat on, and then we put another hat on top of the hat, and then all of a sudden you're kind of just look like an idiot. Kind of had a hat on.
It's too bad because I do think,
And I mean, the whole thing was we were trying to do this. There was a fun thing. The James Fry Million Little Pieces debate was going on at the time. We thought that would be a funny kind of thing to parody too. And so it was like all of these three weird ideas all together.
Yeah,
like a towel that's
to have a
addicted
talking
to drugs.
vagina. Yeah, and then we, it's like we forget because we just start thinking of Towley totally as a character and as a little person, and then after the show's done, we're like, oh yeah, he's a towel.
And what the
like,
fuck is going
that's
on?
already weird. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like, and it's this
Other thing
rule
is-
of comedy, which we know, the hat on the hat, the weirdness on weirdness. You got to have something super weird with something that's really grounded. Like that's what we always try to do. And then this one, we just put weirdness on weirdness. And it's too bad because the scenes, I think, with Oprah and her talking vagina and ass are, like, if you just see them by themselves, are really funny. And Geraldo's really funny, too. I think.
Yeah, Rollo's funny.
But then, you try to then put in this whole million little fiber story with it, and it just becomes kind of weird. And so if I had to George Lucas one episode, it would probably be this one, where I would just go back. I would pull it out. I would make 2 episodes out of this, somehow like The Boys with Oprah, and then a Towley story of, go back to the intervention thing. That's what I do. Maybe next season when we have no ideas,
We'll
just
Lucas
redo.
these. We'll Lucas this one. Lucas eyes.
So sometimes it takes a not so good episode to kind of kick your butt in gear and make you realize you can't do this effortlessly and you have to work really super hard. And a lot of times when we do a show that I don't feel was very good, we always end up with some really good. And I think that Man Bear Pig and the last show of this run, the Dog Whisperer show, are like two of my favorites. I actually, out of all the, even though we had the Big Chef show in this run and we had Cartoon Wars and that whole thing, actually this Man Bear Pig is like my favorite show. I don't know why.
It's just so silly.
It's just so goofy, and I think that's part of why too. It just, even though it is on the down below, it is about an issue about Gore and his whole movie and everything. We don't really touch on that a whole lot. It's just really more just like the kids just going into the cave and getting stuck and just their little survival story, and Cartman with the treasure is just like, that's the kind of South Park I really love, is when it's just the boys being boys. And I just love Al Gore's character. He's just like, it's actually a really complex character because it's one of those that like you feel sorry for, but he's also the antagonist. And it's like, it's really interesting, I think.
We wouldn't want to do Man Bear Pig for a couple of years. We didn't know what it was.
We had the idea of Man Bear Pig before.
And he was half man, half bear pig. We thought that was really funny. And we had that for a long time, but we never really knew if it was a person or was it a thing. Was it imaginary? Was it real? And then we finally worked it into Al Gore thing. Because this is when Inconvenient Truth was coming out?
Yeah, it was right after it had come out.
Oh.
And yeah, I think it was like the week after it had come out. And just like, I thought it was pretty much dead on this, how Al Gore is in this show and how he really is.
By the way, that is bullshit that won for Best Documentary. That's
it's
my only
ridiculous.
Thing. I didn't even see it. It doesn't matter if it's a good movie or not. It's not a fucking documentary. It's a PowerPoint presentation. It's just like, no, that's not what a documentary is. It's not like a big infomercial about what you believe. It's supposed to be like a fucking movie about the human condition or whatever you want to say. Like, there's like a lot of different little, definitions of it, but not a PowerPoint presentation. But of course, it won for Best Song.
Yeah,
that's the fucking biggest bunch of bullshit. A Melissa Etheridge song in a PowerPoint presentation. That wins for Best Song. Fuck you. God damn it. All right, that's enough of that.
So this is one of my favorites of this whole season. I was a big fan of the Dog Whisperer show, and I read Cesar Millan's book, and I just thought it was a great. That's one of the few shows on television that can make me cry, like watching people with a problem dog, and then Cesar just comes in and just kicks ass, and then all of a sudden the dog's super awesome, and the family's happy and the dog's happy, and I just start tearing up. But there was plenty of times when I'd be watching the show, I'd be watching Dog Whisperer and saying, "Wow, I bet that would probably work on Cartman, what he's doing," and so that became the basis for the show. And also the nanny shows.
Right. It was the combination of the nanny 911 shows.
How would the nannies do with someone like Cartman?
The idea that he would eat them alive.
Yeah. And I really do believe, and a lot of people have come up to us, actually, a lot of people have come up to me saying that, they have kids, and they've, since the South Park thing, they've tried the Dog Whisperer methods on their children, and it totally works. Which we knew. I mean, we totally went into that thinking, wow, that would work on a kid, because it really is sort of the same thing as like, when you watch the nanny shows, it's like they're basically saying the same thing. Like, you've got to assert yourself, you've got to be dominant, you can't let them be dominant over you. That's, even though they're not speaking in dog terms like that, that really is sort of what they're saying. Whereas so many parents in America, especially out here in LA, we come across so many parents that just, they want their kids to be their best friends, and they basically had kids so that they could have friends, and be like, me and my kids we're awesome friends, and whenever, especially like when I was dating, and you're
this right here. Wait, this scene right here. Sorry, this is from somebody in LA. We're at her house, and her kid fucking threw the spaghetti on the ground, started skating, and put the thing on her. And she was like, and the mom was like, "That's great."
Yeah, it's like smack him. But no, when I was dating, there were actually chicks, and you always knew when you'd meet a girl that'd be like, well, my mom's my best friend. She always has been. You're like, okay, you're fucked up. And you would know immediately. And yes, soon you'd find out in the next week that they're just super psychologically messed up because, they grew up with parents that were like, we're friends. We're not, I'm not an authority figure over you. I want to listen to you and be your friend. And it's just like that always makes for basically an Eric Cartman in one way or the other.
I think this is definitely my favorite run of this, or favorite show of this run, because it's very, it's not a it's like a smaller, more intimate story, but much more intense with Cartman, and it gets to the point. I think the end is great with the altered states thing, and
Yeah. It's really great because it is a finally, it's kind of like, why is Cartman the way he is? And it's
Right, you
like, it's
find
that
out.
simple answer of he's got a mom who wants him to be his best friend and won't smack him around if he
And in the end, Cartman, there's this moment when Cartman is fixed. Basically, he's become a good kid, and all it takes is one, pulling one brick out of the wall, and the whole thing comes crumbling down the end. I really like the end of the show. Plus, it's just funny.
So that was it for this part of the run. Let's go on to the next season, the fall season. So this episode we actually had the idea for a long time ago.
So awesome to be here. Doing commentary. Just leave all that on. We're so excited to be here doing commentary. It's one of our favorite things to do.
Talking about our own work is something we just love so much that we're trying to. But actually, this show we had the idea to do this show for a long time because so many people in our office played this game, World of Warcraft, including me. And still to this day, I mean, it's been out now for like 3 years or something, and a lot of people in the office will walk by and instead of animating their shot, they're playing World of Warcraft.
Yeah, at any one point in the office, there's either South Park characters on all the monitors or World of Warcraft characters on all the monitors. It pretty much is. Usually there's more World of Warcraft, actually.
And I mean, World of Warcraft was a great game and did a lot of things for the industry, but like after about 20 hours of playing it, I was like, this is kind of the same thing over and over again, and I got bored with it and did what you're supposed to do, which is at some point stop playing it and do other things with your life.
Yeah,
and
have fun with it and then do other stuff. Even the people, when we did this episode in conjunction with the people at Blizzard, the people who actually produced the game, and even they were like, boy, some of these people are losers that play this game all the time. Even the people who work for the company.
But it was cool. We came up with the idea, and we're like, a long time we kind of were talking about how do we do the animation within the game, because we didn't assume that Blizzard was going to help us out. And so, especially under our time schedule, it's like, well, do we go in there and it just looks like South Park? Because for us to do 3D stuff, obviously, that takes a lot longer to do, and we can't do it in our kind of time frame. So we actually did a lot of R&D, we call it in the biz, where we tried it with different ways of animating the game. And then finally, we came up with the idea of like, let's just ask Blizzard if they'll give us their characters, and we can put lip sync on them, and then we can. Actually, it was pretty cool because the way that our show works, the software, all of our animators were able to just import their characters from the game, and then animate them. And then a lot of the show is actually we just had a round table full of people from Blizzard and people from our office playing the game, and
then capturing it on
sitting
video.
there directing. It was kind of like directing a live action shoot. You're just sitting there going, okay, everyone run over here, and they would just all do it within the game, and we'd capture that and put it in the show. And that really that helped us, animate it in time. Having to animate all those individually would have taken forever, but just doing it within the game. Which most of the times when you see the fighting, that's all actual game being played, and obviously when people are talking within the game and emoting, that's animation.
Yeah.
But it was it was a cool kind of crossover. It was.
I'd say the people from Blizzard too were on board from the first. We thought there's no way they're ever going to want to do this, because we have fun with World of Warcraft. We are kind of saying that there are some losers that play it too much and stuff. We didn't know if they wanted to be a part of it, and they were on board like immediately and sent like really great people over that helped us. It's actually totally it was pretty amazing how cool they were about it.
Yeah, but it was funny. We had like every show, we hadn't really written the whole show when we started it, and so we were just messing around. And what the Blizzard people did was basically they had to start their own game, start their own server, so that the people in the office and them could all get on it and do what we needed to do for the show. And at one point while we were doing that, this random character just showed up and started running around trying to kill people. And we're like, who is that? And they said, we don't know. It's just someone logged in from somewhere in the world who had found this server and was now trying to screw up our shoot. And it was so perfect. It was so exactly what the show was about. And then at one point, one of the Blizzard people says, I'm going to kill him. And it done this big, super high-tech thing where he walked over and touched the guy and he died. And the other Blizzard people were like, dude, you can't do that. like you can't kill other players like that. It's not cool. And like this big ethical thing about how they, what they, because they are high up on the Blizzard chain, they're not allowed to go in and serve.
Right, they have like a death touch. They can they know the secret hack to go like death touch anybody, but when you use death touch is highly controversial.
Yeah,
of like when that's okay to do, and when
so
it's
fascinating to watch the whole thing. And so a lot of the banter in the show came out of that too.
I would love to have death touch and just go around and kill some people in World of Warcraft.
That's enough about that, probably.
That's enough about World of
the
Warcraft.
next episode.
So this episode is our, it's called The Mystery of the Urinal Deuce. And it's a little bit about 9/11 and a lot about a urinal deuce. When I was in elementary school, somebody actually did take a shit in the urinal, in the boys' urinal, and they brought all the boys into the gym, and they asked us who did it, and did all that thing where they tried to figure out who did it, and no one ever copped to it. But they said if you admit it now, you won't get in trouble. But of course, no one ever admitted that. And then that, of course, reminded us of 9/11 conspiracies because they're much the same. Yeah. And there was like a big, it's still going on, but like, it's pretty amazing the statistics on the number of people who think that the U.S. government like perpetrated the 9/11 attacks, and the evidence, quote unquote, that they used to support those theories. It's pretty amazing. And there's probably a lot of people right now listening to us talk about it who believe that crap. And this was our episode trying to deal with our astonishment about how people could be that dumb.
We read some statistic that basically one in four Americans think that either the U.S. government was involved or was complicit.
Either did it or was complicit. Yeah.
And so basically, we started this whole episode just wanting to point out how retarded the 9/11 conspiracy is. And I remember it was like Sunday, and we'd gotten all this stuff about 9/11 in there and everything, and it was just starting to sound really like it was just so kind of, 9/11 conspiracy people are retarded, and that was really all we had. And but I remember it was Sunday that we came up with the idea of the urinal deuce. We're like, we gotta throw something else in here. And until then, it was actually just the Hardley Boys trying to solve the mystery of the World Trade Center, which we thought was really funny. But we added this scene. I remember it was just because we said, well, let's just add a real simple scene to the beginning of it so it's not just immediately about 9/11. And so we added this scene with Mackie coming in, being all pissed off about the deuce in the urinal. And we thought it was how pissed off he was so funny that it was just one of those things that, a lot of times we do on a Sunday. We just grabbed onto that. And it ended up being kind of more the fuel for the show, which especially during the beginning of a run, this was actually the beginning of a run. This was the second show. And we're always, thinking a little too much at that point, and so we just sort of brought it all back down to a deuce in the urinal, and it helped it out a lot.
There was also, when we were doing this episode, I remember there was a debate on the radio when I was driving to work one day between the guys who produced Loose Change, which is still the big 9/11 conspiracy movie, and the editors of Popular Mechanics, I think, who were 9/11 conspiracy debunkers, and it was on public radio, and it was so telling because like the Popular Mechanics guys were like these kind of measured engineers. Just on the radio, you could hear they were like, well, here's the thing, and here's where this is, and here's here's where we found out this, and here's who we interviewed for this. And the Loose Change guys were like, really? Well, did you know? And they sounded like crazy people. Just on the radio, if you didn't know anything about anything, you'd be like, those people are crazy. Those people are sane. And it was actually played the week that we were doing this episode, so it was. I think we started out wanting to make a slam dunk case, but then we kind of realized that you can't argue with like retarded logic like that, so we kind of just made this funny, weird
At the end of the show, we were kind of bummed because we're like, because again, there are even people in this office that were like, well, the government did,
Well, did you know
Did
you know that gasoline can't get hot enough to melt steel? Well, I know the melting point of steel. Oh, you do.
And so I mean, there are even those people. And as the show's going on, we just saw that they were just like, yeah, see, you're proving our point. And it was just like, we realized, all right, you know what? No matter what we say in the show, the people that think it's a conspiracy are still going to think it's a conspiracy. And so let's just make it about a turd in the urinal because it's just funnier.
Yeah. Why people believe conspiracies is actually really interesting, but not as immediately funny.
Yeah.
So, but we thought
Speaking of not funny, let's move on to the next one. So interesting thing about this show, and an insight into sort of how the whole thing works here at South Park, is the idea of Cartman being Dog the Bounty Hunter was actually in the show before. It was actually in Mystery of the Urinal Deuce. And that whole show, the 9/11 conspiracy show, was Kyle at one point when he was blamed for 9/11, he went on the run, and then Cartman dressed up as Dog the Bounty Hunter and went after him, and that's where that whole thing was going. But then that's just what it didn't feel like was working in that show, and which was why on Sunday we pulled out all the Cartman being dog stuff and we put in all the crap in the urinal stuff. But we knew that we all liked the Cartman stuff, and we had animated the stuff like the title sequence of him becoming dog and stuff like that. And so as it came time to do a new show, and actually this show we hadn't come up with at all before, this was a very last minute idea. We're like, well, that Cartman being dog stuff was really funny that we pulled out of the 9/11 shows. There's some other way we can use him. And so then we came up with the idea of the teacher having sex with a student.
Yeah, the Mary Kay Letourneau story, but done to the extreme. Which is kind of funny because it's one of those things where, like, the younger you make Ike, the younger the boy is in that, or the one being basically molested, is actually funny. Whereas, like, if it was a teenage boy, probably I don't know if it would be so funny.
No. But I remember there's this big.
When we did this show, I'd still never seen Dog, and Trey or Kyle brought in the this intro sequence. But after we had done this intro sequence here, and I was blown away. I was like, wow, that is really their intro sequence. That is their song.
I remember having this big, because it was Kyle and I that had watched a lot of Dog, and we were having this big, just ridiculous conversation about, like, well, he has to be given Cartman has to be given the authority. He can't just be doing this on his own. And it just went on and on and on. And then finally, it wasn't until halfway into writing the show that the idea of making him a hall monitor came about. First he was just Dog for no reason. And then we were like, no, it can't be for no reason. He has to be given this authority by someone else, because that was Dog's whole thing, is he's just given this strange authority by the government.
Thinks he can do whatever.
But then we came up with the idea of hall monitor, then it all kind of fell into place pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's really the way people did take the hall monitor and, like, resident advisor and stuff.
Yeah.
Is you give them a little thing and people turn into Nazis. Yeah. Is there anything else in this episode?
There's really nothing else going. It's a nice episode. It's a good episode. But
that might be it on this episode.
I think that's all we have to say.
Let's go to the next one.
This was a very last-minute idea for an episode, because it was just, we sat down and said, well, it is Halloween. Any Halloween ideas? Before we had other ideas in our back pocket, but we just wanted to see if we couldn't come up with a Halloween thing. And so we first just came up with the idea of Satan having a huge party on Earth, because of all the people that could go, and sort of based on Halloween parties we used to have, actually. Back in the day, we used to throw big Halloween parties in Hollywood. And that was really it. And then we later sort of decided, let's base it on My Super Sweet 16 on MTV, because that is probably the most disgusting, foul show ever made. When people point out, people try to make us feel guilty for the stuff we put on TV, we're like, dude, Super Sweet 16. Because it's basically just as offensive, except they sort of celebrate. Like, we would be ripping on the people acting like that, and My Super Sweet 16, the girls act that horrible, and they're celebrated for it at the end, teaching all little girls around the country that that's how you should act.
It's really amazing.
They're just, I can say every single girl that has been on that show, My Super Sweet 16, is evil. Is evil, horrible person. It's just that simple. And so
for me, this episode really came together when it was later, after we had come up with the boys and Biggie Smalls and Satan's party and everything, with the idea of the Ferrari cake. Yes. I don't know, that's the dumbest thing in the world, and for some reason that made me laugh. Like, the idea that, like, it could be a real cool thing like a Ferrari, or it could be a cake like it's a party, but then when it's Ferrari cake.
I remember at least 10 times during the writers' meeting saying, we're really going to do Ferrari cake. I was like, because people kept saying, okay, yeah, and then that's how it can come back around to the Ferrari cake. And I'm like, you realize you just said it can all come back around to the Ferrari cake. Like, are we really doing this?
Yeah. I still like the Ferrari cake a lot.
I remember
because the Ferrari cake, we were worried if it was going to be very crab people-esque.
Yeah.
Crab people is definitely our word for, like, are we really going to do crab people? Because we did one time. We did crab people.
We did.
And so that always comes up with, like, is this going to feel like crab people? But Ferrari cake, it seemed to transcend for me.
Yeah. And I don't know.
He gets an accurate.
The big thing I don't remember. I remember with this, there was this big debate over how to start the show because we originally were going to start the show with the boys looking in the mirror and calling for Biggie Smalls, and then go to hell and go to state, which seems so natural in that. Like hindsight, I don't know why I changed it, because it shouldn't have. That's how we should have kept it. Just a writer's note. I don't know why, because I think at the last minute I was like, well, no, Satan's the main character and it's got to be about him and really set up his super sweet 16ness, and it could have been done in a line. Instead, I did it in this whole scene, and I don't know. I think there was bad writing at the beginning of this, but it gets better at the end.
It's pretty funny, I think. The accurate cake.
Oh, and then the other big thing, of course, about this was the Steve Irwin thing.
And the Three Stooges.
Yeah, but the Steve Irwin thing, it was like when this show came out, it was like, oh wow, people are really upset, and we're like, what'd we do? And they're like, well, the Steve Irwin thing, and we're like, that? Like, with all the shit that we've done, people are pissed off about Steve fucking Irwin. Like, we couldn't believe it because.
And plus, the whole joke was you knew people were going to dress up like Steve Irwin that Halloween. It was like, and the whole joke was like too soon, but obviously we were doing it.
Yeah, but it was just like. That, I mean, we couldn't believe that. Like, wow, that's your line, huh? That's the line we're not supposed to cross. Like,
Steve Irwin.
All the stuff we've done, but the line is actually Steve Irwin. Wow.
And plus, in South Park, in the South Park logic and in South Park lore, it's established that basically everybody is in hell.
Right.
That there's, so that's in South Park. It's not even a statement of your, of your character that like you ended up in hell, because we've said everyone is. That all?
I think that's good.
Okay, let's move on.
Well, this was a real painful episode to do because we were trying to.
So we made it two.
Yes, we made it two parts to make it super hard. A lot of it was we had really been sort of put into the group of atheists. I think people just assumed we were atheists.
No, it was that Nightline thing.
Oh yeah, that's
we
right.
did an interview for Nightline, and we are totally surprised by this question the interviewer asks, where he says, so you guys are atheists because you've made fun of religion a lot on the show. And we were like, no, we're not atheists. Like, what? We're not atheists. And we kind of briefly stated our feelings about that. And then we get this call from Penn, our friend Penn from Penn Gillette from Penn and Teller. And
we got an email.
Oh, we got an email saying that he was devastated. He was heartbroken to find out that we weren't atheists. And if you know Penn, he was serious. He really was heartbroken to find out that we didn't consider ourselves atheists. And that kind of sent us on this whole trip where we started reading about atheism and kind of learning about it, and decided to do this very painful to produce 2-episode statement kind of.
Well, because Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, had just come out too, and so
Sam Harris's End of Faith.
Yeah, and so we really fought through I fought through Dawkins' book, and it was just like, wow. Dawkins' book to me sounded exactly like that kid when you were like in high school, that like 15-year-old that was running around going, don't be stupid, God, and it was just like, yeah, we know. And like, I didn't grow up in obviously a big religious household, but like, it was also, it's like there's also like the kids when you're in like first grade, and then there's that one first grader going around telling all the kindergartners, there's no Santa Claus, stupid. How do you think Santa Claus could go around the world and get in everyone's chimney in one night? Does that make any sense? And you're like, dude, fucking chill out.
We know.
We're having fun believing in Santa Claus. Fucking relax. But anyway, we want, it was just, we probably should have let it percolate a little bit. Instead, we just dove right into like, let's do an atheism show. And, a lot of times we kind of figure out what our take is on something as we're doing the show and what our opinion is on something. And then what always ends up happening is we take all that shit out of the show and just put funny stuff in, as much as we can, because we realize we'll do it a bunch, and then we realize, okay, we're just getting preachy here, and not even preachy, because we're not trying to preach our opinion, because usually we don't know what it is, but it's just like it's getting too talky, it's getting too thinky, and let's just add retarded fish frog into the whole thing.
What we wanted to make fun of was how bitchy, like how even if you can read parts of like Richard Dawkins' book or Sam Harris's book and agree with them, you're just like, the tone of it is so bitchy and whiny that you just are like, ugh, like. But then, as we started doing the episode, I think we got into these existence of God arguments, and I was like, "How the fuck do you make that funny? You just don't." Right. So, so then we decided to put otters and a Wii, and the Wii was coming out
because
so that really
honestly,
was
and that really did kind of get to the core of it all. Because here on one side is like, you need to read Dawkins' book, and I'm reading Dawkins' book, and I'm having interactions with Penn and emails saying, and him saying, well, what do you think about this? And really getting down into this whole thing because. and all I had said on the
I will
Nightline
yeah.
thing, by the way, was like, yeah, I believe in a God, but it would take me hours to explain what I mean by that, which I think a lot of people can understand. And I'm going through all that and thinking, but that was like 5% of my day. 95% of my day was like, Wii is coming out in a week, and I'm freaking out because I've been waiting for the Wii for like 5 months. And at the end of the day, that's what I was really concerned about, which really does go to the heart of my religion. It's basically like, okay, you can argue and you can scream and you can get upset at these people and they can get upset at them, but the fucking Wii's coming out in a week, and it's gonna have Zelda with it, and that's pretty amazing. So that was really, that was when we were like, let's do an atheism show, but let's really make it all about the Wii.
Yeah.
And we got free Wiis coming. Thank you very much.
We got free Wiis. I will say,
Nintendo people came
I
a week
wish
later and gave us
Penn would write a book about atheism, because talking to him about atheism was much better and cooler, and I learned more than reading any of the books that have been out recently.
Yeah.
He actually does a better job explaining in his position. He's not a bitchy whiner about it. Let's go to the second part and talk more about atheism.
Really what had happened is that we, just through the plot of the story of the last one, we had sent Cartman to the future. So we're like, dude, we just sent Cartman to the future at like the end of a show. Like, how can we just end that? And we were like, we have to do a part 2. And in a way, we were super bummed because that means we have to do 2 parts of talking about atheism, which we had realized we didn't want to really talk about anymore. And so, but we also, I don't know why, but we just kept saying otters riding ostriches. Ostriches should be riding ostriches in the future, and that's really all we had going.
That's about all we had, yeah. And we had this Buck Rogers beginning, which is pretty great.
I used to love Buck Rogers. Me and my dad would watch Buck Rogers every week.
I like this little costume that Cartman's in when what's the chick's name? It's in the
Wilma. Yeah, what was her name? Wilma something.
What the actor?
Aaron Gray was
Aaron
the
Gray.
actress.
There, that one. That shot. That's the face. Like, all this shit's happened. He's playing chess with otters.
Yeah, we were stoked on that idea. We're like, let's go to the future and then just say that tons of stuff has happened and you missed it all. And that's why we called this like Go God Go part 12 or 13, something like that.
Yeah, part 12.
But actually, this opening scene I think is really cool. It's very cinematic, especially the fact that we just did it the week before.
It's very Star Wars. It's going to drop you in someplace.
Yeah.
And there's talking otters. I mean, who the fuck doesn't like talking otters?
How can you not be behind otters on ostriches? And then so, again, it was kind of like the only point, we had tons of points we wanted to make about atheism. We had tons of arguments with Dawkins' book. We had tons of things we wanted to say. But when you're doing a show like this, it's like you got to just kind of hone it down to sort of one idea. And the one idea was just basically like the one thing that Dawkins had basically asserted in his book was if we got rid of religion, the world would be peaceful and there'd be no war and there'd be
not as much war.
And it's just ridiculous because it's like,
our whole point is people are going to fight no matter what.
And especially for an evolutionist to think that, because an evolutionist of anyone should realize that that's how life works, is it wars upon itself in one way or another. It eats itself, it fights itself, and that's how biology works, and so it was really just sort of that assertion that we wanted to rip on, and also the assertion that basically some of the super intelligent scientist people can be really retarded when it comes to just sort of common sense.
Yeah.
And that's why Dawkins ends up, having sex with Garrison, not having no idea that it's actually he was a man.
Right. Because he can be so smart, Richard Dawkins, but so dumb. It's like
so dumb in the way he presents himself. You're like, dude, don't you realize that's only going to make people mad and not any support?
His big assertion and Sam Harris's big assertion is that atheists are marginalized in America, that like an atheist can't get elected public office. And you're like, well, the only people, if you mention atheism to most Americans, they think about the guy who wanted under God out of the Declaration the Pledge of Allegiance, and Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, who are both bitchy whiners. And you're like, well, no wonder you guys can't get elected.
Right.
You got to think about
have some common sense.
Yeah, politics isn't about truth. It's about presenting some big smiley face guy. That, So.
But I really love in this. I remember we pretty quickly wrote the phone call section where Cartman calls back and is trying to get people to not let him freeze himself. I think that stuff's really funny. But also the animation, if you look in the background, there's just always tons of stuff going on. And the look of this whole show is pretty amazing. The animators did an amazing job in a week. I mean,
it is. It's unbelievable. Let's move on.
Yeah. So this is a typical episode where we always do this thing at the beginning of the run where we say we're going to bank an episode. So we get back, we've kind of been on vacation, and we get back and we kind of work on an episode that we have an idea for. We don't know quite where it's going to go, but we'll do a show just so that we have it, in the bank, so that after 4 weeks when we're dying and we've been going 24/7 and we just need to rest for a day, we can take a day off in the middle of the run. So we had started this episode, and this was going to be our banked one that we do in the middle of the run somewhere, but it just never felt right. We kept coming back. Part of what made this run so hard was we kept coming back to the writers meeting and saying, okay, let's do the bank show so we can take a day off. And then we'd sit here and talk about the hockey show and go nowhere with it every single week. So finally it got to the end of the run, and it's like, okay, well, all we have now is this bank show. And we were so tired. This run, not all of season 10, but this second half of season 10 was probably, I think we would all say, the hardest run.
One of the hardest runs we ever had.
It was really, we
production-wise.
kind of thought it was kind of the end of the show, because we're like, wow, I don't know that we can all do that again, because every show was just so hard
Giving birth.
come up with and finish. And so as we're doing this commentary now, we've just finished the next season. We just finished airing season 11, and it was actually one of the best runs we've had, where it was easier and the shows were better, and so things are all right now. But anyway, we had this show, and we're just like, all right, let's just run with it. And it's sort of why it's a little hodgepodgey.
There's
we
a
were
lot of
also
funny stuff
really
in
tired.
it.
Yeah.
Our favorite part of it, which is probably a lot of people's least favorite part of it, is the end, where suddenly We Are the Champions plays after the kids lose, and you do a really happy ending of the other person's story, which I think is really funny. It's the end of Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. And all of a sudden the Red Wings get to have their own happy ending.
Yeah.
And it's like, thanks, Dad. And that's the touching moment.
Yeah, and you're
between
like,
the
wait,
dad
who are
and the
those
son.
people?
Who are those people? And they get to
So-
have their happy ending.
It was just that too. Like, we thought that was super funny, and at the end of 7 weeks of hell, we're just like, I think that's funny, and we had no idea if it would be or not. But most people didn't think it was funny. They just
It's totally funny on a conceptual level. It's probably not very satisfying when you actually have to
When
suffer
you
through
have
the
to
show.
watch the
You're like,
show.
okay, what's the fun thing
yeah,
at
and
the
it's
end?
like and the kid dies of cancer, and you're like, yeah, that's funny. And
Here's
then
the happy
you're
ending
watching
for
the
some
show,
of
and you're like, hey, why do I have to watch that?
But it was great. It was almost like the idea, the conceptual idea is like, here's a show. Okay, there's, and everything. And Stan is like, there's supposed to, I know there's a happy ending at the end
Right.
of all this. These are those common beats in the Bad News Bears story. We're gonna have a happy ending, and then you don't. But then we just stuck a happy ending on there for somebody else.
Yeah.
I think it's super funny still.
But it was the end of a hard run. I mean, the run before this, the first part of season 10, was pretty easy. It wasn't
as
super
hard.
easy, but this one was so hard that we were very glad it was over. But we lived on to make at least one more season. We just finished. We'll see what happens now in the future. But thanks a lot.
We'll see you.